And everybody started laughing really hard. And I'm trying to stay in this dramatic moment. I'm trying to go, and I'm like, so you got to be prepared for those audiences to join in. Uh huh. Mm-hmm.
Have you ever wanted to write and do your own one person show? Well, today we are talking to Don Reed, the king of the one person shows. He has acted, written, and directed 9 one person shows for himself. And today he's going to be breaking down all his tips and tricks. If this is your first time here, my name is Lydia Nicole, and this is Acting Smarter Now. If you could go back and give yourself any advice about your first one man show, how to prepare, what to do, what would it be?
Don't do it. Well, actually, I would probably start with um, the step of accessing vulnerability earlier than later. When people create one person shows, when I first created my first one person show, I was trying to figure out what I could leave out so I wouldn't offend anybody. Uh, and you can't do that. You've got to have it truly engaged. Unless this is going to be some litigious, you know, moment for you, you got to put it in. And that thing you really don't want to put in is probably the exact thing that needs to be in there. So I would say the first thing is access vulnerability as soon as you can. You'll hear me say this over and over. It's like a mantra of mine because vulnerability is a superpower when it comes to creating one person shows.
I'm going to come back to that in a minute, but first I want to talk about your evolution into the one person show because you are a comedian, an actor, a voice actor, a warm up, and a writer. What made you go, hmm, that's not enough? I'm going to do solo shows.
Well, it was a process of my stand up, although very entertaining, didn't have a lot of meat on the bone. It was very only impersonations driven, nothing about my family, because I didn't want to be that vulnerable and interject that kind of content. And then I was working at NBC, started out doing some voiceover and creating promos for NBC for Friends, Frasier, Saturday Night Live, all those shows. And then I worked my way up to co-running the radio and voiceover division. And the guy who I co-ran the division with had done some writing for Roseanne show. And so he's looking to break out further. And he said, I'm going to do a one person show. I said, what is it going to be about? He said, it's about how my Jewish parents are always on my back to do something more solid, like be a doctor or an attorney. It's about them being on my back. He said, how'd you grow up? I said, I grew up in Oakland in the 70s, and my stepfather forced us to be in that religion that rhymes with Jehovah's Witnesses. I couldn't take it anymore, so I moved in with my real dad, but I had no idea he was a pimp. I just thought he was really into hats. And he said, you need to do a one man show about that. So I actually started writing the show in 1999, but I was afraid to do it. I didn't actually put it on stage until 2006. But that was the start of me creating my first one person show because somebody else was doing one. And I helped them get into the HBO workspace to do it. So I had the avenue, but I was afraid. And after we had that conversation, I started writing it then.
Is it 8 or 9 shows that you've done so far, solo shows?
It's nine shows.
So you would have told your younger self not to do it, but you've done 9.
Well, once I got caught up and got bit by the bug, and it started impacting my career very deeply, uh, I had to go for it. One person shows, and I hope I'm not going too fast or jumping too far ahead. One person shows are the best way to showcase yourself separate of the stand up line. The line for stand ups is from here to Zimbabwe. And the line for people actually doing solid, strong one person shows is very, very short. It's very short because people have challenges executing them or committing to the vulnerability, and that will keep coming back up.
Okay, so we're going to do a little mini master class on one person shows. Since you have done 9 of them, I think you are the expert here. So I am going to shoot away at some questions for you. So the
Okay.
first thing I want to ask you is, when you start to write a show, how do you choose your subject matter?
I try to start autobiographically with the beginning of my own life. You know, what actually happened? What was the chronological movement of events? So that can always be a nice starting point for anyone to start at the beginning. And then, so it doesn't seem very like too plain and straightforward along the line of chronology, you can do flashbacks, keep doing flashbacks along the route. And you'll find you'll come onto areas of your life, maybe your college life or after college, that you say, wait a minute, that area is very rich. That could be another one person show. That was the case when I started East 14th about growing up in Oakland in the 70s.
Now, was that your first show, East
That was my
14?
very first show. Yeah, East 14th was my very first show. But I took it all the way up until I essentially graduated and then jumped time to my father's passing. But the area that I jumped was the 5 years I lived in a retirement hotel serving breakfast to the elderly. And the employees were a mixture of college students wanting to be actors and musicians, and some ne'er-do-wells who were kind of selling drugs on the side and just a step away from Skid Row. So all these people were living there, younger, interacting with these older folks. And after a certain point, I realized I was serving them breakfast and they were serving me stories that I would
Mm-hmm.
never, ever forget. And so that became a separate show. So you can look at areas of your life, say, I worked at this place for this amount of time, or these wild things happened in college, or here's my perspective on my entertainment career, as Robert Townsend is so brilliantly doing in his show. But you find a area of your life, concentrate on it, try not to cannibalize what could be in another show. And you got to think of it in those terms. You don't want to think of a one person show as a one off. You want to ideally think like this could be a trilogy or it could be even more than that, which I've been blessed to experience.
You mentioned Robert. Robert's doing a show up in Berkeley that you are co producing called Living the Shuffle, which is going fantastically. And he is discovering a lot of vulnerability within that show. And it is wonderful to watch the development and the exploration of an artist having to relive a story while telling it to the audience. So I'm loving that whole process. My next question for you is, how do you structure your one person show to keep the audience engaged?
I try to structure it overall like a movie, act one, act two, act three, overall, but I actually split it into two acts. Robert does his show straight through. He wanted to do that way. I have two shows that I did that way, but most of my shows have an act break in the center by design. So that people have additional opportunities to market the show. You have an intermission. A lot of times, people will start talking to each other and start texting friends in the middle of the show. So rather than just the intermission or just the end of the show, they're texting friends mid show and at the end of the show. Also, it's another opportunity for you to sell merch. If you have a merch table, if there's an intermission, people will buy then and at the end of the show. So I lean there. And most larger off Broadway and larger theaters want you to have an intermission so they can sell their merch, give an opportunity to look at more posters marketing upcoming shows besides yours, and they sell more cocktails and refreshments at the same time. So it has a twofold avenue. So people can look at it and say, this could be a movie. That's what I kind of want them to feel. I try to do what's going to please me in the overall content. I don't try to create shows like maybe this market will like them or make them, maybe these people like it. It's still very personal, but I do design it so people can get a clear beginning, middle, end feeling throughout the course of the show. Yeah, it's a fascinating process. But if I can dig a little bit more into the process once I actually start structuring, I get a bunch of white index cards. And on those index cards, I write down just about every single story, like Winter Ricky's house, the time Willie had food in his pockets, the time I had to knock on the girl's front door when I was Jehovah's Witness and I had a crush on her. I just put that on the card with a black Sharpie on a white card. And I keep collecting them, and I spread them out on the floor. At some point, when I get around 70 to 75 white cards, I start editing out and removing the cards. And it's not really something you can actually do on a computer. You probably can because they have index and final draft, but the physical tactile move of having those white cards spread out on a big dining room table or floor, I can see the whole thing right there in front of me and go like, this story isn't as strong. Pull that one out, put it aside. Pull that one out, put it aside. Okay, these two stories go together, and I can expand these into a larger chunk of the overall show. Let me move this out and this out. And wait a minute, I thought of another idea that goes with that, and write another card. But you want to kind of work those cards down to about 30 cards. And then from those 30 cards, you go onto your voice recorder and you say them out loud. Just say the story as best as you remember it out loud, best you can say it out loud. Then after that process, you start transcribing it off the audio. Start, stop, start, stop, start, stop. Once you get that whole script down, it'll be very rough, but you have most of your show there. Then at that point, you go through and you polish it. You put a big polish on it. Like, right, turns out I don't need that anymore. Cut that out, cut that out. And you eventually have the whole script. At this point, you start to move into putting it on its feet. And that's when you turn the cards to red, yellow, and green. Green are the stories you could tell across a coffee table in a second. You put those cards, transfer it from white to a green card. The ones that are almost there, you put on a yellow card. And the ones you should keep, but you don't know at all, you put on a red card. And now you got like 25, 30 cards, but you know what level they're at. Now, I learned this the hard way. You can save so much time by looking at the green cards and knowing what you know, what you kind of know, and what you don't know. Because when you start rehearsing, our natural process is to, okay, I'm rehearsing. If it gets interrupted, we start from the beginning. We start from the beginning. When in fact, you could have the first 10 cards down, and now you're wasting time going back in the rehearsal, going back over those 10 cards where the love and the tension needs to be on the yellow and especially the red cards.
I love this process you're giving me. I've taken several one person shows, I've done a few one person shows. I love how you're breaking it down. You have your stories. You got your stories written on your red cards, your green cards, and your yellow cards. And most of your stuff is autobiographical. You got these stories. What are the challenges? Because we talked about this earlier, that unless it was litigious, you just did the story. Are there any challenges when you are bringing the story into being that you go, you know what? I don't want to out this person like this. I don't want to. I don't want to share this, or you know what? I want to share this, because you actually talk about in one of your shows the whipping that your stepdad gave you and made your mom participate.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we want to cover our parents.
Right.
We don't want to tell all the truth because we don't want them to look bad. So for you, how did you go through that? Because that's a rough terrain to like expose to strangers.
Exactly. Well, particular to my mother, which was the biggest thing, because she was the only person that was still alive at that point of the characters in the show, besides my older sister, who doesn't have as much of a role as a character in the overall show specific to East 14th. She has a larger role in the prequel to East 14th called Can You Dig It, which is everything that happened before my father ran off to be a pimp, and then later on pushing me through UCLA. My mother specifically, I did the show in LA. It was supposed to be for 5 weeks. It turned into 5 months. Then I was approached by a person to take East 14th off Broadway in New York. I ran it in New York the whole summer of 2008. And I had done at that point 90 performances and hadn't done it for anybody in my family at all yet. So then I got an opportunity to bring it to the Bay Area, to the Marsh San Francisco, when there was once only a Marsh San Francisco. And I knew I had to call my mother. And the main thing connected to it, there was a lot of betrayal connected to my father taking me over his girlfriend's houses and then making lying really fun. He made lying like a fun game. And he would say, baby, tell me this. We're on our way home right now. So today's your turn. You make up the lie. I'm like, me make up the lie? He said, yeah, baby, it's your turn. You make up the lie. Next time it'll be your other brother's turn. It'll be your sister's turn, but today's your turn. What we can tell your mother? I'm saying, okay, this sounds like fun. Okay, we went to the park. He said, that's good, that's good. And why we ain't hungry? Why we ain't hungry? I said, because your girlfriend made us something to eat. He said, definitely don't say that. Definitely don't say that. Don't say that at all. And then I said, oh, we went to the deli and made some sandwiches. And that's why we're not hungry. He said, okay, that's good. Let's tell her that. So we tell my mother the lie. And I went to my mother as an adult now doing this show and said, I gotta tell you something and talk to you about something. She's like, what? I said, I'm gonna be doing a show in the Bay Area. She said, what's it about? I said, about our family. She said, what part? I said, all of it. She said, okay, okay. I said, so mommy gotta tell you something. Listen closely. I have to tell you something. She said, probably something about your father taking you over his girlfriend's houses while I was at work. Here's some more stuff for your show, boy. And she gave me some more material. So I lucked out on that one. But what I often do is I'll change the names to protect the innocent or the extremely guilty. I'll switch it up. I had a friend who did a lot of drugs, and he's in the Kipling Hotel show. And there was a window of time that I didn't have anywhere to live. I was homeless down in LA. And because I had nowhere to go, I was doing drugs with him. I was going like, I got nowhere else to be. I didn't even want to do any, but because I didn't have anywhere to go, I did them. And I changed his name to protect him because of his connection to the drug world at that time. I didn't want any retroactive impact to him, so I changed the name. Sometimes, though, I'll keep the name because I'm looking for the person. Like I haven't seen them in years, and I'll put their real name in the show in hopes they go like, "Hey, that's me. What you doing?" I'm like, "Oh my God, there you are, Vernell." That's particular to a gal. If I could tell, try to truncate this little story. It was a gal who was really cute. I met her on the bus. She was really hot, and then we started dating each other. And I was in my senior class year of school. I was a senior, and before that, I was a Jehovah's Witness knocking on doors and a nerd. And over the summer of the between the 11th and 12th grade, I moved in with my father. Came back with a Lord Jesus perm, humps, platforms with super bell bottoms, Captain America T-shirt, and I was in the mix. I still have my ticks of blinking and stuff, but I was way, way like 80% cooler than I was right before the last year when I couldn't be involved in sports and had to sit out. And I met this girl who was really cute, and we started skipping school to go to her place and doing the like a wow wow every day. I miss senior class pictures, senior class picnics, senior class everything, doing the like wow wow with her every day. And she took me to this apartment, and the apartment was stunning and it overlooked Lake Merritt in Oakland. I'm like, this place is absolutely stunning. She said, yeah, this is my uncle's spot. And then one day we were walking down the street, not far from an area where there were some working girls, and her name was Vernell. Her name was Vernell. They say, what's happening, Coco? How you been doing, Coco? What's happening? I'm like, why are they calling her Coco? And I told my father and my brother when I went home, I said, we were down by the host store and everybody's calling Vernell Coco. And my father said, you need to stay away from there and don't be hanging out around there all together. Stay away from there. And my older brother came over. He put his arm around me and he said, she's a hoe. I'm like, no, she's not. No, he said, she's definitely, probably, for sure. I said, no. And eventually, it was pretty raucous because he tried to stab me. Another story. I'll tell you some other time because I wouldn't take her to the senior prom. But later on, she showed me a bunch of letters and she said, there was a time when I thought we might be able to be together. And she showed me these boxes, all these boxes of letters. And she said, these are from my pimp. He's in prison. He's been writing me for 3 years. I told him about you. And he said, if I could be with you, I should definitely, definitely do it and leave the game. But I see we're not a match. So I'm going to wait for him. So it was this hilarious moment that also turned into this very deep moment. But I say her real name in the show because I would like to see how is Vernell doing now? Is she alive? Did she make it out or not? So I use her real name. So in terms of character, try to have a conversation if the person's alive, or you might want to be bold and use their name because you're looking for them, or you can change their name and still put it in the story and still be true to the authenticity of the tale because what went down is real. You just
Mhm.
shift the name to protect the innocent, or as I said, extremely guilty.
The intro of my show is I don't change anybody's name because they're all guilty. The story you are about to see is real, and
Right.
everybody's name is real. That's it. So I love your grace. You extend grace to people. I do not. You're writing, you're putting stuff together. You're deciding based on your cards and your stories what the theme is going to be, what the show is now about. So now you have your cards. You've figured out, okay, these are the stories I'm going to work on. This is what it is. How do you then take it into a real storytelling portion? Because we have stories, but it's one thing to say, well, this happened. But now you're telling it in a story that it has to be on stage, that has to be animated, that has to be entertaining. Do you sit with that, or do you find that the story itself is enough?
The story has to have many stories within it. That's the answer. It's not ever really one story. It's a compilation of stories with laser sharp transitions. If you can transition smoothly between any number of stories and not go on too far a tangent, because tangents usually mean you're heading into another territory that might be another show, or it's content for an entire book if you were working in that direction. But by design, you want to try and have a a story that happened as early as you can almost remember. Then the next window of time, and 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 that creates. If you stay in that chronological layout, you're ending up with a tale that is an overarching story, a series of stories being a cohesive one whole story. But it's important to do that along the way. There's something I got to mention now, which a lot of solo artists don't really think about that much. And it's so important what your show is called. The title and the poster are so important. What I learned when I was at NBC in advertising and promotion is before anybody sees you might have an amazing 90-minute one person show. You did it, you wrote it, you put it together, it's structured, you're ready to go. But if the title is wrong and the poster isn't right, nobody's going to come see it. You have an opportunity of basically 30 seconds to see a poster. You have to kind of time it with the fact of when you drive down the street and you stop at a light and there's a bus stop poster. That is designed, as I know from network promotion and advertising, to get somebody to see the idea and get it in the length of time they're at that light. No more. A billboard is for that, to drive by and you get it. So you, like I said, you can have an amazing full show ready, but if that poster and that picture and that tagline or that title aren't right, nobody's coming. No matter how amazing the show is, they'll never make it there. You got to grab them. That's where that marketing advertising acumen must be in play because we want to create great art, but it's also show business. You got to make a return, or the theater won't keep you, or you won't be asked to go to other theaters. You can say, I did well at this theater. This is how well I did. You can speak to them, and then you can get more and more and more theaters to be able to tour a solo show.
So now you have your show. You pretty much decided what the story is. Now you're going into rehearsals, and now you're going to put it on its feet. What is the next step once you have the story ready, or at least have a good skeleton ready?
You have the good skeleton ready, and the script is, you're saying from the point of view that the script is complete.
Mm-hmm.
Now you want to make sure that each one of those major story beats you have on cards. And that's when you go to a rehearsal space. You could do it at home and lay them out on the bed. But ideally, you want to rent a cheap little rehearsal space, all kinds of rehearsal spots in LA and the Bay Area have these tiny rooms with a mirror. Rent the tiny room. It's like $20 or $40. You might be able to negotiate with them to say, I'm going to be here quite a bit. And they'll give you X amount of time for a low rate to come in there with a mirror, with your cards out on the table on the floor, and start doing the storytelling right in front of the mirror and on your feet, not sitting down, not just for memory, but seeing how your body's going to move, how you're going to be seated or standing, start working on the blocking, because a lot of people think a lot of storytelling is very static, like you're going to stand central. And only a few people can do that. And it's because the writing is takes you on an imaginative run. But the most entertaining shows have a sizable amount of blocking and movement and character shift. But get into that space, and if it's at home, make sure you won't be interrupted and rehearse each card until it's at the green level, as I mentioned earlier, and get them all to where they're all green, and just keep doing sections over and over. Now, like maybe I'm going to memorize these 5 cards, then the next 5 cards. Don't think of it as I got to memorize this whole thing. You only have to remember 5 cards. And then once you get those hooked up, push them aside, next 5, next 5. And that locks it in your head. And then you keep doing it till you get it to a point where you have it mostly memorized and can go to that studio and do it into the mirror without having to stop.
I would also recommend they do a reading of it. Rent a little space, somebody's office maybe, but have like a little space where you invite maybe 20 of your friends to come and hear it. And you just read it. You just read it without all the stuff so they can give you feedback by laughter or oh, because I do find that that does help because as a comic where you think it's a funny joke and then you put it up on its feet and it dies, or you're not quite sure and you get it on its feet and you go, oh my god, this is gold. And so for me, I always think just doing a reading of it to get feedback before you even start the rehearsals is gold for the performer, because it tells you if you're on the right track. Maybe there's a chunk that you think is good, but the audience isn't buying. Like I remember doing my show in the very beginning, very, very beginning, and I read it. I was in Mark Travis's class. He's in LA. He is king of the one-man shows as far as helping actors, and he helped Chaz Palminteri do A Bronx Tale, and that blew him
Awesome.
up. I was in his class for a year working on my show, working on my show, working on my show. Finally got the courage to go, okay, I'm going to do a reading of it, invite people to come in. And I talk about my childhood because, we are siblings from different mothers.
TKs.
That's right. Except my mother was a prostitute. And so when I did it, there's a chunk in there that I talk about going to stay with the Amish for a summer. Well, what I learned was it was its own story. It could not be in the story I was telling. And so sometimes because you talked about that earlier, sometimes you have pieces that belong to another show. They might have been chronological, but they really don't work together.
Along the lines of you saying or reading aloud for a group. So my version of that, which I highly recommend, besides also doing the version you suggested, is I would find open mic poetry and music nights. Those are the places that are going to allow you to go up and tell a story. If you try to go do them at the punchline or the comedy store or whatever, there it's like, no, please don't. Unless you're really accomplished and you're just testing out the hilarious parts, there's a way to do that. But for the most part, you want to go to a night where people are going to lay in a theatrical space, a listening space, poetry, ease back, not firepower, punchline, punchline, punchline. And you can do that at those nights. I did that in a place in LA. It was just a little space, and only maybe 15 people could fit there at a time. And what I did is I went back every week and I did my opening and said, I grew up in Oakland in the 70s. My stepfather was a Jehovah's Witness. My real father was a pimp. And here's another story from that time. And that's how I was able to go up every week and do a different chunk, but it was tested in front of a live audience. And then I did the whole thing on stage.
So now you are working out your stuff in the mirror, you're getting it ready. When do you go looking for a director?
In my situation, Robert Townsend had told me years before that I was a director because of my stand up. He said, if you're doing stand up and you move like we move and you do characters like we're doing characters, you're already directing a show every night. So I didn't even consider I need to get a director. I knew, and I had directed at that time, I directed some short films for HBO, and I directed a ton of large cast voiceover projects. So I had a handle on directing. So that was, and I was, at first I was writing down written and performed by, but I didn't write directed by. And then when the NAACP was doing their nominations, they said, who directed the show? I said, nobody. They said, well, then that's you. I was like, oh, well, yeah, I guess that is. And that was the beginning of me taking credit for directing my shows as well. And recently I got nominated for that. So it's kind of cool. If you feel you really need one, you've got to let that director ideally see it live to make a decision. He can't really make a decision straight off the page unless he knows your work and he knows you're a strong actor already. Don't leave it to the page because you can bring so much more life to it. There are nuances that aren't on the page that you can play out. And so I would try to suggest him coming out to a live reading, as you mentioned, or a night where you're going to put it up for a night. You can invite more than one director and then choose from them who approaches, oh my God, I love this work.
And make sure that they're in alignment with what you want to say, because you don't want somebody to come in and totally rework it, that it's no longer your story. It becomes something else. You have a couple of shows that you have infused with improv. When you've done those shows, what was going through you that you said, okay, this particular show needs to be able to breathe? I don't want to be restricted by just the script. How do you intertwine improv with part of the script that is written?
Okay, so it's two things. Sometimes that improv is connected to the truth and explaining what it was like in a metaphor or simile type way. There's the first gal I lost my virginity to. She was dentally challenged. There was no furniture in her living room. She was missing many of her important teeth, not molars, front important teeth gone, right? And that came out of an improv of explaining a real situation. Those lines, you know, are fiction explanations of the truth. And so that's one space where I will use improv. I was at Lake Merritt trying to impress some girls, and there was no more hair emollients at the house, so I used some butter. I put some butter in my hair, and many flies were excited about it, and gnats, and I was sweating butter just down like that. Land O'Lakes, challenge butter. Those moments of the explanation of that real thing is where the improv has come in.
You use the improv to clean up your script, to write it, or you continue to use that section of improvisation, or that section to improv to get back into the script?
I usually use it to explain what an experience was like, and making up that like is always something that's exaggerated. But once it's very strong, I lock it. I try to
Okay.
lock it because it's good
Okay.
language. And
Okay.
now that improv has created some great writing, and then you want
Okay.
to hold on to it. Some people, they get kind of bored of doing like, oh, I'm doing the same thing over and over. I never feel that way because there's always different ways to approach how you're saying something. There's a myriad of ways. So I personally don't get bored that way. But I do that improv in those spaces of explaining what something was like. I felt like I was in an oven in an Ohio Players video, in that area, finding that area. Once I get it, I lock it in, and that's part of the language.
So now you have your script. When do you start memorizing it?
Well, that's the thing. You're likely not going to have it fully memorized before you start. You're going to have a lot of it memorized. And that's where you have to give yourself the freedom of, I know this story. I've sat down and told people in the backyard over a barbecue. You got to get into that mode first. And then when you get that next week to work on it before you have to go up again, then you begin to grab more of the language, grab more of the language, grab more of the language. But as you go along, you may not have it fully memorized until you're like maybe 10 or 15 performances in, but at least know where you're going. You have to know, like, after I do this story of going to Lake Mary with my father, the next story is going over Willie's house. And just know the Willie story. And then as you move along and improv those beats to sharpen the language, you want to say it closer to word for word so that you can really memorize it and lay it down. But don't expect and don't be terrified that you don't have the whole thing memorized word for word the first time you go on stage. But just know what the next story and the next story and the next story is that keeps you on your narrative track.
All right, so I know my story. I'm getting to do it. I'm going up. I'm working on it every night or every few nights, and now I have to mentally start getting myself ready for it. How do you get yourself mentally prepared to go on stage physically and vocally or emotionally?
Emotionally, it's usually going to hit you when you step off stage and you're done. It it could be in the way somewhat at the beginning, but when you find out if you're truly being vulnerable at the beginning, when you walk off stage, you end up being pretty emotional. You might even break down crying a lot when you first start. But once you, because some of those people will be gone and will remind you of some people along the way that left. But then you'll start to understand that you're bringing them to life every time you hit the stage, and that will give you some space.
When you get ready to go on stage, right? You
Okay,
have
yeah,
the
yeah,
nerves, but you also want, you got to have something that propels you to get on
right.
stage and anchor you. Something that Tony Robbins used to
Love
say.
Tony Robbins.
I learned this a long time ago from him. He would say, before you get ready to get in front of an audience, start jumping up and down, get into your super pose, start doing whatever you need to get that confidence to hit the stage. And as an actor, I found that helped me with acting. It helped me with stand up. It also helped me with my one person show. So I would get into my poses. I would jump up and down, get myself ready. So when I went on stage, I was the conductor. As a stand up, what I learned from stand up is that in the beginning, I had to work hard not to be the thermometer, but to be the thermostat. Because I would take
Exactly.
like being an actor, you take the temperature of everybody in the room. Do they like me? Do they not like
Right,
me?
right, 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 right.
But when I started doing stand up, it was like, wait a minute, you're not going to tell me what to do. I'm going to tell you where we
You
going.
would exactly.
And
Right, right.
but it took me a while to learn that. So that's where that question comes. How do
Okay.
you get yourself ready so that you are the tour guide? You are the one who is taking the audience where you want them to go.
Exactly. So the first thing is being very early to the theater. I highly suggest anyone doing a one person show is at the theater 2 hours before the show starts. Once you get it super, 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 super down, you can flex that a little bit more. But ideally, no more than an hour before the show starts, because 30 minutes into the hour before the show, they're going to open the doors. You're going to hear people milling about, and it can kind of mess with your head. So that's when you need to make sure you get away to a quiet space and begin some breathing exercises. Holding your breath for 7 seconds, letting it go for seven. Do some breathing, some as much stretching as you can. Yoga, take that on if necessary, but do a ton of stretching. Another very important thing is I learned a vocal exercise that is the equivalent of putting ankle weights on. Like when you're running, you put on ankle weights like that. Is you take your tongue, you wash your hands, and you hold your tongue like this, and you say tongue twisters, and you say a lot of them. The best thing to do is to memorize a monologue from something that is Shakespearean, even. I do it with Alfred Lord Tennyson's Ulysses. It little profits that an idle king by this still hearth among these barren crags matched with me aged wife. By the time you do a long passage that's about 2.5, 3 minutes long while holding your tongue, when you let go, you'll be speaking trippingly off the tongue. And that's one of the issues with actors' nervousness before they go on stage is, will I get tongue tied? Will I stumble over my words? You can remove that by doing the right amount of proper vocal warm up. If you're singing in your show, you want to sing those lines out loud before you ever reach the stage. Don't wait till you're there to see if you're going to find the note. And also, so your tongue is light like a boxer, hold your tongue and say a long, difficult passage over and over and over. And then when you let your tongue go, you'd be like, bring it on.
I love that. We use a cork to
Use a
do the
cork.
same. Yeah, use a cork. You put a cork in your mouth, and then you have to speak through the cork, or you get a
Mhm.
pencil and you put it under your tongue, and you have to start. You have to be able to speak it
Little Brian.
very.
Right.
You have to articulate it. So yeah, I love
Yes.
that though. I love that. Hold your tongue. Hold your tongue. How do you keep your energy during a solo show?
Well, like I said, about 80% of my solo shows, there's an intermission. That's a third reason why to have an intermission is you get to switch shirts if you want. You can, wipe down, powder off, re-stretch, get reorganized. That's why I suggest an intermission. But some people will start with a solo show that's shorter. It might be 30 minutes long, 40 minutes long. It's about that preparation to drive through, but you also have to be aware of where you are. And if you note the audience is some shifting, there's a little of this. One of the key things I never want to see is a couple and one person has their head on the other person's shoulder while they're watching you. That means they're kind of tired. And at that point, you got to lift your energy. You might thinking, am I talking too loud? Am I moving too fast? Is my energy out? But it's time to shift to another gear. About halfway through, you got to go vroom, 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 vroom. Because if you stay at the same, they're going to kind of flatten out. So you got to take some moments to pause. A pause also energizes an audience. People don't realize it's as much talking louder and moving more energy as being completely quiet. They go, wait, what's about that? That establishes that need to know when you get those quiet moments. So it's a mixture of vocal up, energy up, and silence.
How do you collaborate with a team when you're doing a one person show? Because even though it says it's a one person show, usually you have to collaborate with the lighting person, the sound person, tech person, the stage manager. That even though you're the one up front there are a few people around you that's making it possible. How how do you encourage an actor or comedian to be a great collaborator to these people?
Well, you have to realize, as you mentioned, that you're not doing this alone. It's a lone effort while you're on stage. Multiple other players are involved. One of the key things is when you step off stage during rehearsals and you're speaking to sound engineer, lighting, you're in your directorial state then. You're not in actor state. You should be in director's mode and turning on that natural collaborative good director ear. Not it's all about me. It's all about the production. At that moment, you're interacting with them about who will be on stage, but it's not really you if you're being in director's mode enough.
So basically, you're putting on your director hat at that moment. You're letting go of the actor hat and you're putting on the director hat. And I think that's a great thing to say because as a solo performer, you actually have many hats. You're not just the actor because you're the writer. If it ain't working, you got to rewrite that puppy. You have to you have to be aware of the hats you're wearing. And I love going back to the 2 hour rule. to get there at least 2 hours before the show, because it allows you to focus, it allows you to center yourself, it and to let go of what you went through that day. You know, sometimes you can see um, solo performers come to the theater, and if they're really good shows, I will go see them a bunch of times, and I can always tell when they came to the show late, because it takes them 15 to 20 minutes to settle in. If they had been there earlier, they were ready before they hit the stage. But if they came in late, they were having to find their way. So I love what you say. You know, you got to take care of the actor. You got to take care of yourself as the director, the writer. You have to take care of all those parts of you, all those hats you're wearing, and you have to know which hat to wear when.
When you're doing a solo show, it's far more strenuous than when you're in a play with 10 people. You have X amount of lines. This is a dynamic where all the lines are on you. So you got to take care of yourself. Any extraneous partying you might be interested in, it's got to go. You got to eat better. You got to sleep better. You got to take a nap a lot of times in the middle of the day to make sure you'll have the energy level to sustain an entire show. You can't just think you're going to be going to lunches and shopping and hanging out straight up until showtime. It doesn't work like that. It's really kind of a lone world where you have to kind of go be by yourself. You can kind of do something in the early morning to really early afternoon, then you should stop down, be by yourself, take a nap, and start getting into the mode of a show. So it's actually way more time than that 90 minutes you're on stage. It's also the 2 hours of showing up earlier. It's also the nap, and it's also how you treated yourself, ate, and worked out that day. Because John Leguizamo was talking about whenever he's doing a one person show, he knows he's out of it, out of the mix. There's no cigars with this boy. There's no a little bit of brown liquor on Thursday night. It's none of that. And oftentimes, even in the summer, you got to wear a scarf around you. You got to protect your voice because of air conditioning or talking too much on the phone. You got to whisper sometimes. When you start doing a show and it becomes successful and you have to do like three, four, five, your voice starts going like, wait a minute, and so you got to protect your voice. It's a very solo experience sometimes doing a solo show because you have to really take care of yourself, and that's your responsibility.
What are some of the challenges, talking about wearing different hats? What are some of the challenges the actor faces as the producer of the show? Because you also, in the beginning, you are producing your own show. If you want to get it up, you got to figure out how to get it up. You know, do you rent the theater? Do you rent a little space? How are you doing it?
Yeah, it's about those hats. At that moment, you can't really look at it from a perspective of how will this actor get this show produced or how will this director get this show produced. You're in producerial mode, and you have to kind of forget about that moment unless part of the pitch to get into a theater is you kind of turning on a little story in your meeting that's from the show. Then you kind of combine the actor producer. And sometimes for people who are afraid of sales, if they just look at it from a perspective that they're sharing a story or performing a little bit, they'll feel more comfortable in that producerial space of talking to a theater to get a shot to go in there. And when it comes to that, you usually want to try to find a dynamic that is a split rather than necessarily getting locked into this is how much they'll pay you. That can be good if it's a handsome payment, but if it's kind of like it's on the fence, go with a split and count and bet on yourself that you'll get the butts in the seats. Because sometimes you'll work hard, it'll pack out, and you've agreed to this little tiny amount of money. Or you could also do a deal where it's X amount of guarantee. You're going to give me X either way. And if the show performs at this level, then you'll throw me down this much. But if you kind of start at a percentage cut and then you know you do well, then you'll end up with a better deal a lot of times. But
Okay.
you got to put that producer hat on. and sometimes forget about the other aspects of what you're bringing to the table.
I would also add to that, if you're starting out, find a theater that is dark on certain nights. So, and you ask, can I use your theater? We'll split the door, and then you get to pack the place with everybody you can the first few nights so that they will give you a run there. I find that to be
Yes.
very effective, especially when they're nights that they're dark. Or for me, it was the Comedy Store. I did my show for a year in the belly room. The deal I had with Mitzi, because I was a regular, the deal I had with Mitzi was she would let me do my show from 7 to 9, and then I had to host Latino night right after that. And for me it was great, and I charged. I got to keep the door. She got the 2 drinks, and it worked, because the belly room is its own little womb. It's a womb. You can do whatever you want there. And so it's finding a place that, or find a little small theater that seats maybe 30, 40 people, and just start packing it so that they will allow you to come back. You've done really well in that you have the marsh that is really supportive of you, but I'm sure it didn't start that way.
Yeah, it was a result of running first at their San Francisco location and delivering. Once they saw I was delivering, they will give you an extension and another extension. You say, okay, 6 more weeks, and that 6 weeks start running. Then they'll say, oh, wait, we're still doing well. You want another extension. I got extended 22 times in Berkeley. And then the founder came to me, Stephanie Wiseman, and said, we're thinking of opening a second theater in Berkeley, and we want to take you over there with the
She
investors
came to you in San Francisco and said they were thinking of doing a theater in
in
Berkeley.
Berkeley. And so we
Okay.
want to take you over there with the investors. If you'll commit to doing East 14th and any of your upcoming shows while you were at the Tonight Show, because I was at the Tonight Show with Jay Leno at the time and coming up from LA to the Bay Area every single weekend. They said, if you'll commit to doing your next show and your next show, then we know we'll make the commitment. If you're not going to do it, we're not going to do it at all. So I said, I'm in. And there were a number of, and I'll say this loudly, performers at the San Francisco Marsh who said, I'm not going over there. I'm not going to Berkeley. Why would I go to Berkeley? I got San Francisco theater is the move to do. And after I start running there, they realized they had then 2 places to run, and everybody showed up. Hello.
So you would drive up to Berkeley on Thursdays or on Fridays to do the show since you were working.
For a window, I ran out of the Tonight Show in Burbank to Burbank Airport to make a flight by 5 o'clock, fly to the Bay Area, and then do the show. I did that for about maybe a year, and it was a nightmare. And about 4 times it completely failed. I didn't even make it in time. So then I went with flying up on Fridays and doing Saturdays and Sundays only, and just packing it out for extended periods of time. East 14th ran a year and a half after it got to Berkeley, every weekend, every Saturday and Sunday. But then 2014, I started driving, and I drove up on Fridays, stay Saturday and Sunday, drive back on Monday. Or I'd stay the week. Sometimes I was staying in hotels for a week because I was working and writing on something. There were windows of time I was dating. And so I would stay with who I was dating at the time. Not dating nobody else now. I'm in love. Anyway, I'll slip in anywhere I can.
What's the key difference between doing a stand-up show and a one-person show for you?
I believe the one person shows are surprisingly more satisfying. There's a magic in stand up of hearing a whole room full of people roaring laughing. Roaring laughing. There's nothing really like that. But to even think you could be on stage, have people roaring laughing, and then maybe also hearing them sniffle because they're crying, and An offshoot of that is them saying, I felt inspired. You don't really get into stand up thinking you're going to be inspiring people. One of the byproducts of doing a solo show, a one person show, and doing it well is that you get the laughs, the emotion, and the inspiration. So for me, it's more. I still love stand up and I do it intermittently, but I don't love it like I love solo storytelling. It's not even a close second, really.
What are some of the techniques that you've taken from stand up and brought into the one person show?
One of the key things is making sure you're getting laughs. Some people will write a solo person show and just be so solo and so internalized about it. They're not taking the time to look at things that could be turned inside out. Pretty tragic, pretty bad things. And they're keeping them in tragedy. A lot of people make their one person shows about, look what happened to me, as opposed to what happened for me. They'll skip that part because they start, well, I'm in the one person world and it's about this drama. You better use some laughter. You better have a lot of laughter. In fact, I rarely hit the dramatic shift on my gears until about 15 minutes in before I'll hit them with like a heavy beat. Once you get a little stronger muscle on, you can do it a little sooner, but you want to make sure you get them laughing first and then shift into dramatic. And you can go back and forth then, hit the peaks and valleys and the roller coaster moves throughout. I have to say, anyone who's thinking about doing a one person show and you're not a stand up, experiment in it some, toy with it some to see what it takes to make sure you're getting laughs because you want them. They're vital to keeping the energy going throughout the show because it's just you on stage.
For me, I found stand up gave me so many tools to be able to bring into one person show. I was able to, in acting, when you're doing a monologue, you have to know that the audience is your partner. You're not by yourself. And a one person show is the same way, in that the audience is your partner. They may not have dialogue, but they are your partner. You're working with them. And if you are present and you're really doing your job, every show is different, right? Every show, the audience listens differently every show. And so that, having done, because I had done stand up maybe about 10 years before I got the courage to do my show.
Right,
I had
courage.
written it, I wrote it, I read it, I I got a couple of directors and worked on it. I took it and workshopped it in class, but it I literally had to cling to a director and let him walk me into the theater, because I did not want to go. I did not want to go. But I will say that having had stand up under my belt for so long made it so easy. Well, easier to do stand up, because I mean to do the solo show, because I knew what that was like, because it's different from doing a play. You know, if you're doing a play, you can have the fourth wall up and and work with the actors and life is good and blah blah blah. But when you're doing a solo show, it is you and the audience, and you have to take them in. You have to embrace them. There is no fourth wall. You might have a fourth wall for a second because you're in a scene and it requires you to do some imagination, but that's not that long. You're back with the audience, so you have to use
Exactly.
them. So for me, I am so grateful that I had stand up under my belt before I did the one person show. And I'll just say this one more thing: the only actor, and I mean a serious actor, that I saw do a one person show when I was a teenager in New York was James Earl Jones. He did Paul Robeson. And I tell this to everybody because it changed my life. I was a teenager. I was maybe 15, 16. I went to the theater and there was a snowstorm. They had shut New York down, but James Earl Jones was still doing the show. We walked we walked 40 blocks to go see that show, and there were maybe 50 people in an audience of in a theater of like 500. I mean, it was a huge theater. That man performed like it was standing room only. He did not leave anything. He gave us everything. And I remember thinking, that's how you have to be. And there were many nights, and you can share with me your perspective, but there were many nights when I did my show and it was theater for two. I had two people in the audience.
Right.
And I was like, James Earl Jones did it. You get out there and do it, because your ego goes, nobody came, nobody came. And then the two people are looking at each other like, should we leave? And it's like, you can't leave. I see you. And what was so funny is those two people that would come ended up bringing other people because of the fact that I committed, even though it was only two people. And sometimes our ego gets in the way. We go, there's nobody here. And I remember the first time it happened, I had a little meltdown. It took me back to my childhood where my first birthday party, my sister made this party. She made all this fried chicken and potato salad. She had decked it out. And I was waiting for my friends to come from school. Nobody came. It was me and the dog and my sister. So I remember the first time I was doing my show in New York, my solo show in New York, down in Alphabet City. And I come on the stage and there's two people. And they're on the side. They're not even in the middle. They're on the side.
Oh, like, no.
I was like, oh, Jesus, nobody's here. This is terrible. But you know what? That was the best thing that happened to me because I told myself, you've had one person in the audience at the belly room. This is a piece of cake. Now you go out there and you do your stuff.
Even if you came from stand-up or not, there are certain audiences that came to focus on laughter. And so they'll be laughing a lot. We discussed this backstage with Robert the other night. There are audiences who are on a laugh blaze and they're laughing and they're clapping. And you get to the dramatic part and they'll still, first, a few of them will go, is this funny too? Like, no, this is dramatic. Pull it back and you've got to guide them through it. But sometimes an audience isn't screaming laughing. They're laughing in this median level. But almost every single time I've discovered that the audience isn't screaming laughing, they're getting all the dramatic and the story beats in a much richer form than does the big laugh audience. There's nights where you get them both, but a lot of times where the audiences are going like, and clapping a lot. If you don't slow way down when you get to the dramatic parts, they'll start laughing at that too. Like, all of this is funny. No, this part, shift gears, slow it down. And then when you don't beat yourself up because you're not hearing screaming laughter, allow those audiences are listening more intently at the whole story. But just a note, because that'll throw somebody off sometimes.
Yes. Jackson Purdue, when I first started doing stand-up, told me, turn down your laugh meter. Do not be a laugh whore. Get on stage, do what you need to do. If they laugh, they laugh. But your job is not to police. They didn't laugh here. They didn't laugh there. And if you can turn down that laugh meter and just do your job, bring the show, share the story, it's always, whatever they give you is always unexpected. It's always a treat. Mm-hmm. Because some audiences will talk back to you. Some audiences, act like you're the movie screen, and they can just
they didn't. No, they did not. The stepfather did that. Ooh.
And I would say to everybody who's doing one person show, you should take it into community centers. You should do it in places where people don't have theater etiquette.
Right.
Because then you will know, you will get it. I took it in, for me, when I was starting to do my first show, I took it into youth correction facilities.
Ooh, ooh, ooh,
Oh
ooh.
yeah, and these kids would tell me, "What? What? What's going on? Fifi, what?" Oh my God, they were just talking back to me. Miss Lydia, that happened to you. You know, they would just
Right,
talk to you.
right.
And when you can do it and get through that kind of stuff, then you can take it anywhere. But I would say take it to those places where it's gonna challenge you on on a lot of levels, you know, and
It
they'll
will
tell you if it stinks. They will.
in a minute.
I don't like that. I don't like that.
There was a moment in one of my shows, the Never Too Late show, that has some amazing things going on for it right now. That has the Johnny Carson library attached to it. But there was a moment in the show where I explain how it's double crossed by a manager, and it was completely silent. It's a super
Tell
dramatic
us the
moment.
story, please.
Johnny Carson handpicked me to be on the Tonight Show in '92, and Robert Townsend, after I was on his HBO special, called me at home and said, Johnny Carson just called me at home and he wants you to be on the Tonight Show before he leaves. And they had 2 months to go before he's going to leave the air. I told my manager, she's like, oh my, that's so exciting. I'm going to call. So she's calling. She's supposed to call his office directly. Tried, called, called. A couple of weeks went by. He's got a month and a half. He's got a month. He's got 3 weeks left. She finally calls me and says, I was trying and trying, Don, but we didn't get through. So I didn't get to do the Johnny Carson show, even though he handpicked me to be in the show. I didn't get a chance to do it. I was brokenhearted. I watched him say goodbye to 50 million people after watching Johnny Carson with my grandmother, watching him while I was homeless at UCLA and hanging out in the lobby pretending I lived there, going, one day I'll be on there. I didn't get a chance to do it with Johnny Carson at all. And then I got a call from my manager's office about 3 months after that. And he said, Don, I have to tell you something. She never called Johnny's office. I was like, what? Because she never called Johnny's office. It's a very dramatic moment. But in one audience, a woman said, somebody should have whooped her ass right in the middle of the show. And everybody started laughing really hard. And I'm trying to stay in this dramatic moment. I'm trying to go, and I'm like, so you got to be prepared for those audiences to join in. Uh huh. Mm-hmm. You know, a lot of times we're seeing doing very good shows, including Robert's show. It becomes an orchestra of almost like church. Mm-hmm. Uh huh. Right. Mm-hmm. Ah ha ha. That claps. Yeah, and they'll be writing with you, and can be very different from theater with you and 8 people on stage and exits and entrances because you're right there.
So I just want you to tell the last part of the story because it does have a redeeming thing to it.
Yes, to somewhat truncate it and then give you some information you might not be aware of, or you might be, because I hinted at it to Mr. Townsend. After that, I kept going. I didn't give up. There's a quote from Johnny Carson. He said, "Desire is the number one key to success. Not education, not talent. It's desire." So I realized if I kept my desire, I could keep going. So I kept going, and years later, through a unique set of circumstances, that little assistant who 2 decades, 20 years before, had warned me and said that manager's taking advantage of you, they became a producer at The Tonight Show with Jay Leno. And that's how I got that magical gig of being the opening act warm up comedian for over 1,000 episodes. But then I told that story on an Apple podcast. That producer was producing this big event in New York at the National Comedy Center, where they inducted Richard Pryor, George Carlin, Whoopi Goldberg, Trevor Noah. They were inducting a new exhibit for Johnny Carson. And they said, we'd like you to be there to tell your story about not getting to do the Tonight Show. So it's a lineup of performers who had been on there 10, 15, 20, 30 times. I've been on there zero. But I told my story, seated, about how even though Johnny Carson handpicked me, I got screwed out of it by a manager who said, Don's the workhorse. As long as he's booked on the road, the lease is paid, the lights are on, there's toner in the copier. I was trying to get other people on before Carson left, whatever with Don. Well, I told that story, and when I was done and explained that I ended up at the Tonight Show, the host said, "Hey folks, how'd you all like to see Don do that set that Johnny Carson wanted him to do 30 years ago?" And it held up. I did it. I got a standing ovation. I started crying. The audience started crying. And then Johnny Carson's family approached me after the show and said, "We will license the entire library to you, full access to do this as a one-man show." So now I have this show called The Never Too Late Show about normalizing amazing things happening late in life. And the kicker to that story is last week, Simon and Schuster reached out to me and said they think it can be a genre defining book. So that's what's jumping off with that. Ooh, ooh.
I think of that story and I think of a rejection becoming your win, because that child of God did not make the phone call. It led to something many years later. When we pray for stuff, sometimes it doesn't come at that moment, but it shows up when it's supposed to. I
Absolutely.
love that story. I love that story.
And I've spoken to a lot of comedians. Some comedians did Johnny Carson and it launched them into the stratosphere, like Roseanne and Keenan and different folks did it, and that was the moment that launched it. But most of the comedians didn't anything happen. They were just good. They had that wonderful moment, but it didn't necessarily turn into something special. And there's a guy, a comedian I spoke to, who said, "Yeah, I did Carson 3 times, but I don't have an entire one man show with Johnny Carson's image and likeness and the family approving me to do this whole 2 hour show that can now be a book and a spinoff of a late night sketch show." So you not getting it paid off. The Never Too Late show is something that is special. And at the end of the show, I turn it out from me to the audience. I say, "It's never too late to write that book. It's never too late for you to take that trip. Never too late to fall in love." Pushing it out off of me onto the audience, normalizing late in life. And the interesting thing is, people are told it's too late to do things, not only when they're aged. There's a woman who came to the show. She's 33. And he said, my mother came, she told me to come see the show. And I just graduated from Berkeley and I'm 33. I had a child and I stopped down everything to have the baby. But I went back and got my degree. But I'm the manager over these women in their 20s who's saying it's too late for this, it's too late for that. You're told it's too late for a lot. So won't you just stick with a regular job? You don't need to be trying that. But you got to believe in the importance of never giving up and locking into that. And literally not giving up until you get what you want. Until it's dirt nap time, it's not over.
Amen. Amen. I'm with you. I think as long as you got breath in you, you keep going for what it is you want because it's gonna
Yes.
come. The Bible says, though it tarries, wait for it, because in the perfect time, it will come. That is a promise from God that we hold on to. I want to ask you about promotion and marketing because you had started to go there earlier. You worked for a period at NBC working in their promotions and advertising, and then moved up into voice, heading up the
Right.
voice department.
Right. It was advertising and promotion of the shows for the radio and also finding voices for on air talent for promoting Law and Order, Seinfeld, all the different shows they had at that very strong window for NBC. But the skills I garnered from that time is what I apply to my promotion of solo shows. And one of the things, particularly with the advent of phones, most people buy their ticket on the phone. They don't necessarily buy it on the laptop where they see your big, beautiful picture. And when I was running off Broadway, I had the idea because a part of my set is an East 14th sign, a street sign with my father's pimp hat on it. And I had this idea I'd be running and jumping to reach for it. And it looked great. It looked great in a big poster. But on your phone, it's just this stick figure of a little guy reaching. Who is that? And I found that out the hard way, that on the phone, I'm nobody there. So I highly suggest solo artists do something interesting where it's the lion's share of their body or face, not some other extraneous thing. Because when it drops down to that phone level where most tickets are purchased, you're not, they can't even see you. And you want to brand your shows with your face and your likeness.
Put a pin in it, people, because it's something you need to come back to. If you're working on a one man show, one woman show, you need to know how to promote it, how to advertise it, how to market it so that you can win. You can win. So now, and now that we've talked about all of this, I want to talk a little bit about your childhood and your parents, because as a child, you had a lot of trauma, which is
Hmm.
that's what comedy comes from. Good comedy, Richard
Right,
Pryor comedy comes from
right,
trauma, people. It comes from
right.
trauma. So you as a small kid, you got to be with your mom and dad, and then your dad decided he wanted to have both his cake and eat it too. And it
And some
lasted.
and some lemon meringue and
Sweet
a
potato
chocolate
pie.
cake and a sweet potato pie and some biscuits and syrup and butter and some cornbread. Yeah.
When they split up and now you were living in total trauma, because there's the trauma of the parents divorcing, and then you have a man who comes into your mother's house who is not being caring or fatherly, but being a autocrat of sort.
Right.
This is how you do it. um it's pretty traumatizing. You talk about in one of your shows how he beat you so severely and made your mother beat you that you finally said, you call your dad and say, I want to go with you. What took you that long to make that call to go to your dad's?
It was the fear of leaving the religion. There was such a stronghold for my stepfather that you're in this. And then the congregation has this whole setup where if you don't follow the rules, you're disfellowshipped, you're out of the religion. And they were a family to me, even though we were under these very strict rules. I was getting these little pluses, and this is another reason why maybe I hadn't left earlier, is I started giving speeches in the congregation. Besides going door to door, and I sometimes did it 100 hours a month. This in the summer you can put in 100 hours and log them. I started giving speeches in the congregation, and I was getting kudos and a plus from that. And then this strange thing happened with my stepfather. He came to me one day after I gave a speech at the congregation. He said, I'm a BMW salesman. I'm the first black BMW salesman in the United States. And he was incredible at it. He said, but you're a better speaker than I'll ever be. I guarantee you're going to end up doing something in this world, public speaking, performing, something like that. I'm telling you. And I found it fascinating in that time is that's how complex people can be. The person that can show you the lowest moment in your life where he had me crawling on my hands and knees to my bedroom and kicked me in my ass on the floor. He said, if you're a man, stand up and box me. But if you're an animal, crawl to your room. And I crawled to my room. But that same person who showed me the lowest moment of my life was also the same person who revealed my gift to me. And that's how complex people can be. If you incorporate that into your stories, the complexities of people, not just all the bad they did, but what part of it was good. He pushed me and pressured me, but I learned a lot about public speaking. And I don't know if I would even be in entertainment if I wasn't forced to do that at first and then falling in love with a different form of it on my own. Nothing to do with the religion. I'm not involved. I don't jam anybody up for being a part of it in that way. I have my own separate, different relationship with God, but it's not that one. And it doesn't require people to follow rules. But it took me a while because I was getting some kudos from that area while I was also getting this damaging. But then I start visiting my father on Sundays after door knocking, and it was like a party over there. And young ladies were like, "Oh, you're kind of cute. You want to go in the back and kiss me, Mr. Don Reed?" I was like, "I think I do. I think I do want to go kiss you in the back." And I had to get out of there.
Oh
So it
my
was a
God.
mixture of not believing in the
Oh
religion and
my
the
God.
promise of
Uh,
was out there as well.
that's too funny. I will say, as I was listening, as I was doing my homework on you and listening to all these stories, um, you talked about your father making you leave at certain times because there was business to be conducted. And
Yes.
so I had a very colorful childhood. I lived with my mom on the weekdays, on the weekends I went with my dad, and she brought home all kind of crazy ass men. And I was at that, I'm not the oldest, but from like 5 years old on, I became the oldest because she threw my oldest sister out, and my oldest
Hmm.
brother was already had lived with some other family. But there were times when men would come and I had to be the man. I mean, I would have a bat. I'd sleep with a machete. I'd be like all this.
Whoa.
Oh yeah, it was. You talk about ghetto life. It was ghetto life. And so, and I went to Catholic school. So I didn't go
Uh
to
oh.
Jehovah's Witness, but I went to Catholic school, and I was their best seller because that's how my father taught me. You know, pimps are sellers. So I learned how
Right.
to sell. And when I was in second grade, the Pope was coming to our parish, our school, our Catholic school also had a church, so the Pope was coming. And I told the nun, the Pope is like my father. He's a pimp because the women give him money. He wears rings. You know, they didn't let me go to the service, which was rare because you had to go to every service and make sure that your envelope had money in it because
Right.
you all had a number. There was a number on a box. You got a box of envelopes, and every envelope had a number, and they could tell if you didn't come by that number, or if you came and you didn't put anything in the bucket, your mother would or your parent would get a call. So anyway, I jump now to you sharing about your dad making you leave. So at a certain point, I left my mom's house. I was like 13, and I was bouncing around with different family members. And so
Hmm.
at 16, my father, I ended up at my dad's. And that was short lived. I ended up there for 6 months because I was ruining his business. Like he would make me leave at certain times. I would have to leave because business was being conducted, and I was.
Conducted. There you go.
That's right. It was a business. They were being conducted, and I was not, I was in the way. So towards the end, there was a John who used to come around, and every time he came in, I would like give him the worst looks. And my father said, "Baby, you gotta go because you're ruining my business. You gotta go somewhere else, baby. I can't take care of you no more. Okay, I love you. You know, Poppy love you, but you got to go, baby." And I had to go. I ended up going and sit and staying for a couple of months with my brother. But when I heard your story, it made me laugh so hard because I remember as a kid having to get the hell out the house. You can't be here between 3 and 5. You got to go.
You
And
got to
so
roll.
I was very opinionated as a kid. I was very opinionated. So when I heard your story, I was like, he was so nice. See, I would have come after that stepdad with a bat. I would have beat his ass. He would have at least gotten. He would have gotten a good hit from me. So I'm sorry you went through that, but I'm glad that it turned out to your benefit. You know, that he did not beat you down, and he did not beat your gift out of you. That so I love your story of being the underdog but coming out on top. I love that. And so I won't go into that more, but there's one more item I want to go into, and that is, you talk about Bill Cosby helping you in the beginning. And so, with another story I love, please share your story. We have no judgment. We just want to hear the story.
Um, that was the result of there was a time when Sinbad and I sometimes would call each other and pretend we were studio executives offering deals. So, you know, Sinbad would call, uh, Don, this is Mark Davidson over at Paramount. We got a deal. We want to talk to you. We just leave that on each other's answer machine back when people had answer machines. And I would call him and say, hey, Sinbad, this is the president of show business. We've got a wonderful deal for you starting next Thursday. We're like, so he called me and he left a message on my server saying, hey, Don, it's bad. Listen, man, Cosby saw you last week on Robert Townsend special, and he wants you to be on the show this coming week. They're going to rewrite the show for you. I was like, click. I hung up. I'm like, yeah, you ain't going to get me on this one. Yeah, this ain't real. Ain't no way this is real. Cosby wants me on the show next week. Sure. Things don't work that fast, right? He called back. He said, no, Don, answer. I hung up on him again. And he left on the service because I wouldn't pick up anymore. He said, Don, this is bad. This ain't no joke. Here's the number. Have your people call. Cosby's people right now. You're going to be on the show this week. This is like a Thursday. And he's saying starting next week, he's flying to New York and they're rewriting the show. Boom. My manager, not that manager, different person, called, reworked it. Next thing you know, I'm first class flying in. I get there, staying at the St. Moritz Hotel with a room overlooking Central Park. A car picks me up. It goes down to the set. I get to the set, and there's a director, and Malcolm Jamal Warner had seen the HBO special as well, and I did the Kung Fu theater thing. I've seen your Kung Fu. Let's fight. That whole thing. So they had written that into the episode. And the director said, I got an idea. The way we'll do it is this way. Don, you'll start the Kung Fu thing, and then we'll have Malcolm do it, then the other friend will do it, and then Carter's like, no, see, the thing is, this is guy's thing, man. When Cosby stepped in, redirected the scene, he said, this is this guy's thing. They can't ever even do it like him. So we're going to set him up, and then he's going to take off. He said, do it all over the living room, do it up and down the stairs, answer the phone, hit some pictures on the wall, and just go off, and then just end up back here, and we'll pick up the lines from there. But this is your moment. This is your stage. So I did it. Boom. It went great. We had another scene after that. Each day, um, Cosby was dropping knowledge on me. He gave me two big comedy bits to do. At one point, Thursday, day before show, he said, you like sushi? I had never had sushi in my life. I said, yeah, of course I do. Right? He said, meet me in my dressing room. We'll have some sushi. And I was sitting there going like, he don't care if I don't actually show up. I'm just like nervous. I'm like, he just said that. And if I don't show up, fine. And Tempest Bledsoe said, Don, Cos don't always invite people to come up in his room. Mr. Cosby doesn't roll like that. You need to go have lunch with him now. And she's younger than me, going like, get in there and have lunch with Cosby. So I had lunch with him. He said, what size shoe you wear? I said, 12. He said, you're in luck. Reebok loves us. He gave me some shoes. He said, everything you tried on this whole week, take it home with you. You're only going to wear a couple of things on the show, but all the wardrobe, he said, take all of that. So he did that. He gave me information. He was telling me back then in like, I guess it was 94. He was telling me, he said, do your own stories. He was telling me to do a one-man show back then, but I didn't really get it. He was saying, tell your stories. But I was still doing, I'll just do impersonations and that'll be safe. I don't want to talk about the pimps and the Jehovah's Witnesses. Then later on, during that stay, we finished up. I'm going home with shoes and bags. And he said, tell me to give you some luggage. And I went back to the hotel and I'd ordered some shrimp one day and some lobster and some champagne. I tried to pay for it. I said, I don't want this to be on the bill. I don't want Cosby thinking. And they said, no, 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 it doesn't work that way. He's taking care of everything. I said, I want to pay for this. And no, they said, Don, if you try to pay for something, Cosby will be very upset. He's really wants to do this for you. So boom, that's what happened. Right after that, having done the HBO special with Robert and doing the Cosby Show, it got me on the college circuit, and that's how I bought my first home. Um, and then Cosby came to the Tonight Show years later when I was working there, and I said, I just started doing one person shows. He said, you kind of slow on the uptake, ain't you? He said, I told you that, what was that, 10 years ago? I told you to tell your own stories. I was like,
That's
Anyways,
funny. Well, I'll tell you my Cosby story. I have a good
okay.
Cosby story. I know of all the stuff he did, but he never
Yes.
offered me any lattes. And so in '87, because I was always sending notes to, I had a target list of who I wanted to work with. And so two of the people on my target list was Robert Redford and Bill Cosby. And like clockwork, I would send them stuff all the time. Well, I had done a movie of the week with Shirley Ralph, Bonnie Franklin, Sylvester, oh God, Sylvester, I can't think of his last name. Oh, and Rosemary Clooney. Sylvester, oh shoot, I can't think of, but he was wonderful actor. And so it was coming out, and I went and saw it, and it was the worst movie of the week ever in the life of horrible movies of the week. It was called Sister Margaret and the Saturday Night Ladies. And
What?
I was one of the Saturday Night Ladies with Shirley, Rosemary Clooney, and some other wonderful actors that were in it. And so I said, okay, I don't want anybody to see this. So I'm going to send the postcards out the day it airs. That way,
Mhm.
guarantees nobody's going to see it. So I sent one to Bill Cosby. And a week later, like you with Sinbad, I had the same thing with my answering service. You know, they would say, oh, yeah, Universal call. They want to see you, blah, blah, blah. And it was always a joke. I said, oh, great, da, da, da. Well, this day and I was like, this had probably been, I don't know, like maybe a month had gone by, a month and a half, and I was already ready to give up the business. I was done. I was like, it's not working. I'm leaving LA. I'm going back to New York. I just can't take it. And so it was like the low of lows on that day. So I called my service and they go, Bill Cosby called. I said, I am not in the mood today. And they're like, no, he really
One of those
called.
jokes.
He really called. I said, Bill Cosby did not call me. Stop it. No, he really did. Wait a minute. So then three of the operators get on the call. They go, Bill Cosby called. We were all listening. He called. I said, and he left the number. So I take the number and I am mad now. I'm like, who is messing? Somebody's messing with me and I don't like it. So I get on that phone and I'm calling that number and it's ringing, ringing, ringing. And I was like, I'm going to stay on this number until somebody picks up. For an hour, I was calling the number for a whole hour. Finally, somebody picks up and go, Bill Cosby's room. And I was like, hi, this is Lydia Nicole. I'm returning Bill Cosby's phone call. And they were like, well, Bill's on set right now. Can he call you back? I said, absolutely. So I get off the phone. I call a friend of mine. I go, Bill Cosby called me. He's going to call me back. What do I say? And they were like, well, just calm down. What do you want? I said, I want a job. So as soon as Bill Cosby called, I said, Bill, I need a job, Bill. I need a job.
Did you really?
Yes, I did. Yes, I did. You would have thought we knew each other for a lifetime. He said, okay. He said, all right, well, let's see what we can do. I said, they won't see me for another world because they say I'm not black enough, Bill. I'm not black enough. What's that about, Bill? Why can't you do one for them? Hey, what is the problem? So anyway, I had the best time with Bill Cosby for about a month. He would he was doing Leonard the Six, the
Hmm.
movie of
Leonard Part Six. Yeah.
Leonard Part Six, and so he was like, okay, I want you to call so and so, have them meet you. So I would call the office and say, Bill Cosby told me to call, and I always got the same. Well, we don't know who you are. I said, but that's okay. Bill said it. So it was like
Right. Right.
said I was like, look, I don't care what you say, Bill said. So finally, and he's giving me all these people to call. He has me call the head of the studio to get an audition with the head of casting and the director. And I tell my agent, who I ended up firing because of it, I tell my agent, hey, Bill said for me to call to get me in there. He said, well, they called and they want you to send tape. I said, oh, no, Bill didn't say that. So I got on the phone and I called myself. I wasn't waiting for anybody to call for me. I said, listen,
Ah.
Bill said, I'm supposed to come in there and meet with you guys. When are we doing this? So I
Oh
went in
wow.
there, I met with them, and then Bill sent me to Vegas, had me come to Vegas to meet him. And he was performing at Caesar's Palace. He sent me up to the restaurant to eat. And the woman from who played Daisy Dukes in what was that? Dukes of Hazzard. She was Daisy Dukes. Her and her manager ended up coming and sitting with me at the table. And they were like, "How do you know Bill Cosby? How do you?" I said, "Well, I sent Bill a note, and he called me in." So, and they're looking at me strange, like, "Who is this person at this table?" I had the best time with Bill Cosby ever. And then I would send him notes. Nothing ever happened to me. And I'm a street kid. So I was always like looking like, just in case you
Right.
think I'm doing something, I got something for you. So
Right. Right.
that was my stance. It had nothing to do with him. It was just, I'm a girl and people always trying to do something. So
Right.
being from the ghetto, you're always on top of it. But
Very wary.
he never did anything to me, was never inappropriate with me, treated me like a daughter. I think I probably resembled his daughter and I was feisty and I had mouth on me. So he was always kind. And when I started, when I was doing stand up, I would send him texts. He says, don't do that joke. Don't, and he would like, don't do that. Then when I had a group called the Hot and Spicy Mamitas, I sent him the CD that we did, because at a certain point we had an old manager of his representing us, and I said, "Oh, we got so and so Silver. I can't remember his first name, but so and so Silver." He says, "Run as fast as you can. Get away from that man."
Oh
So
wow.
we dropped him. I said, Bill said he's got to go. We got to let him go. Let him go. But he was always, anytime I wrote him, he always answered me back, always. And then cut to maybe 6 months before the whole thing blew up. Robert was working with him on a TV show that Bill wanted to do. So I was in the room every day. Let me tell you, I had the best time with Bill. I would laugh and I would sit there and listen to all his stories. And at one point he said something to me, like he says, "Well, I said, Bill, I'm from the ghetto, Bill. I'm from the ghetto. We don't have that kind of. I didn't grow up in that kind of life. I'm from the ghetto." And so he was always very kind to me. And he started to tell me stories about his childhood. He had a very traumatic childhood, very
Mm.
traumatic. So anyway, Yeah, the day that everything blew up, I was dropping off a lemon sweet potato pie to him with uh, some warm Kool-Aid, because he talked about how he had a neighbor whose mother would make lemon sweet potato pie and Kool-Aid, warm Kool-Aid, and how much he loved that. So I brought that to him, because I was like, when he said lemon sweet potato pie, I said, "Ooh, that sounds nasty." He says, "Don't knock it till you tried it," and
Who?
I did it,
That,
and it was
that
good.
sounds
But
kind of amazing to me. Lemon sweet potato pie sounds amazing, actually.
it is. It actually is delicious. But yeah, but I just wanted to share my story, because you had such a similar story of, we know he's Dr. Jekyll, he was Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, but talk about people being complex, that there's a lot of complexity. Here was this guy who was at the top of his game. He was the guy, and he sabotaged. He had everything, he sabotaged, but there is a lot of good to him. It's that Dave
Yeah, yeah.
Chappelle, joke. He raped, but he helped. It's
Right,
that
right,
thing.
exactly.
And sometimes people are, I'm not condoning anything that he did. I think he needed to go to jail. I love you, Bill, but you needed to
Yeah,
go to jail. That
right.
uh but I do think that he single-handedly helped so many people get in this business, so many people of color in this business who probably wouldn't have had a career if it wasn't for Bill Cosby opening the door. So I just wanted to let that in.
Yeah, that is the complexity. Not unlike my stepfather, the same person who did this did this. People, in a fascinating way, are that complicated that they can be that wonderful and giving and that dark simultaneously. So hopefully, we get the best of human beings. We get the good part.
I want to throw some names out to you, and I want you to tell me what you got from them in a sentence. Sinbad.
Hookups. Uh, Sinbad got me on the college circuit. That helped change my life. Sinbad was unavailable to do the warm up for a different world. And that's how I became the warm up there. And that's how I moved out of the retirement hotel where I was serving breakfast to the elderly.
Mm.
That in Hollywood Shuffle, I did Hollywood Shuffle while I was still living there. But then I was able to move out, get my own place because of Sinbad's connections.
Oh, and I just want to say, you talked about the fried chicken wings you had working on Hollywood Shuffle. I made those wings, brother. I cooked that food. I was cooking that
Oh,
food. Just FYI. I was
that's
like,
awesome.
he's remembering the food. Uh, uh,
One other thing
yes.
about Sinbad, very quickly, I'll make it short. Sinbad was the first person to tell me to make a no excuse tape. He said, I got a lot of hookups for you, but I need a no excuse tape. I don't need you to say somebody kind of cut in front of the camera. The sound will be better on the next one. There's somebody talking next to the table, so you can't hear this joke. He said, no excuse tape, and take your time until it's that, because I'm not going to give it to nobody of importance until it's a no excuse tape. And I heard them, and I waited 10 months. And I was living in scramble, scrumble, rook, rook, low life situation. But I said, I can't mess this up. And I waited until I had a 10-minute tape that was no excuse, and things went pow. Because what I found, even at my time at NBC, if someone gave me something and it wasn't quite ready, I bake in an automatic amount of time. An executive bakes in an amount of time they think you will be ready. So you might have been ready actually 3 months past that, but you rushed it. Now you're not, but they'll be good in about 3 years. They got their own time they baked in from what that tape they saw that wasn't very sharp to when they think you'll be ready. So make sure it's a no excuse tape,
I
whatever
love
you're
that.
submitting.
I love that.
Yes.
Robin Harris.
Oh, wow. Robin Harris gave me confidence. And the way he did it was this. Robin Harris hosted Comedy Act Theater on Thursday nights, this club that in the same night you could see me, Tommy Davidson, Robert, Damon Wayans, all in the same night, and Sinbad, all in one night. And he was also hosting comedy contests around LA. And he said to me one time, he said, you want to make $250? I said, yeah. I said, I get $250 for just doing stand up. And then this was the broke days where $50 was an amazing amount of money. He said, $250 was like, what are you talking about? He said, it's a comedy contest. He said, just be in it. He said, you're going to win. But I don't know why he thought I was supposed to going to win. It wasn't like rigged. He wasn't the judge. He said, no, you're stronger than people. So each time there was a comedy night that he hosted was a comedy, he said, you want to come make some money? Come to this night. And I go there, I do my best, and I would win. And so his confidence in me allowed me to hold on confidence for myself. So that's what I got from him.
What did you get from Byron Allen?
Oh, a business acumen and a not give up attitude. I was at a party in Beverly Hills, a very small apartment in Beverly Hills, and Byron Allen showed up and he had on, everybody was dressed in their like, jeans and tennis shoes, and he had on a suit with no tie. He wears that a lot, a suit with no tie. And they said, what you been doing? He said, oh, I've been working on this project from my kitchen table. I've been calling and calling and calling syndicated stations from my kitchen table. I got like 400 no's already, but I'm not giving up. And he kept calling them, broke through, and found ways to give his content to these channels for free in exchange for whatever advertiser was going to be giving money to that time slot. So he said, the production is going to cost you nothing. Just split what McDonald's, just split what Mercedes is going to give you in that time slot and give me half. And you didn't have to have the headache of creating the content or anything. And that built it into an empire. But when I thought about him being at his kitchen table, calling and taking no's as I'm getting closer to a yes instead of rejection, that's what I got from him. Don't give up.
What did you get from Jay Leno?
Jay Leno, a work ethic that is insane. In 22 years, and I was there for 1,000 episodes, Jay Leno missed one day in 22 years. One day. And that's because he had to get rushed to the hospital for a procedure. That's the only day he missed. So one day I was deathly ill. I was crawling on my hands and knees. And Exie, my ex-wife, I call her Exie because we were still great friends. Just talked to her this morning. I was sick where I was crawling to the toilet, crawling in the shower. She said, can't you just call in sick? I said, no, Jay don't call in sick. He set the example that you do not call in sick. You do the show. Show must go on. And so that's what I learned from him. So there's certain days I would go like, no, do it. Rise to the occasion. Unless you got to go to the hospital, you be at the show. Unless you've got COVID or something that's contagious, you go do your show.
What did you get from Ossie Davis?
Oh, wow. Responsibility. I don't know if many people know the story, but Robert Townsend called me and said, Don, I got a role in Soldier Story, but I'm supposed to next week do this PBS film that Ossie Davis is directing and Ruby Dee's playing my mother. Can you juggle? I said, can I juggle? As a matter of fact, I can. He said, okay, it's a dramatic role of a clown who's become an alcoholic. He was in the Korean War. He's back in the United States, but he's kind of forlorn and depressed and doesn't know which way his life should go. But the kids, because he can do this great clown, still love him. And his friends are trying to tell him, be this clown, be this uplift for others since you're not happy with yourself. And Ossie Davis was the director. And he pulled me aside and he said, I believe you seem like you're waiting for me to tell you what to do, how to act, how to perform. This role is your responsibility. I'm here as the director to lead you, but the lion's share of the responsibility rests on your shoulders. You do the role. I don't tell you how to do the role. You do the role, and then I season the role. And then after it was all over, and he said, oh, great job, fantastic. When we're done, Robert said, I was afraid to tell you, but when I told him you were replacing me on such short notice, he said, I didn't tell you. because I know you might have freaked out because he said, "This guy better be good." I'm glad I didn't know that. But he helped me to learn to take responsibility for my role. Don't wait thinking the director is going to lead you. Come with your perspective of how the role is supposed to be played in a very strong manner. And rather than having to tell you what to do, they can season what you've chosen.
What did Ruby Dee give you?
Patience and timing. I noticed sometimes I was like, did she forget her line? But she didn't. She was just sitting in the moment. Take your moments. Sometimes we are, as performers, and especially comedians who do comic content, we go like, I better get to the next line. I better get to the next line. I better say the next line. They're there. If you got them, Ruby Dee taught me, take your time, hold in the moment, and then you'll really have them.
When you started doing comedy, you were a very clean comic for a very long time. When did you give yourself permission to sprinkle in curse words?
It was specific to, I am now telling the truth. The truth about Oakland, the truth about my father, who was a hustler and a pimp, the truth about my older brother and his girlfriends. It was not, oh darn. It was, oh shit. Oh man. And so if I was going to get to authenticity, I was going to say the real words. And the real words had a sizable amount of blue words in there. I never use them gratuitously. I make sure it's organic to the story, it's organic to what that character would really say or what they did say. But that was the beginning of it. If I'm doing solo shows, I'm going to be authentic and I'm going to do the real. And before that, I hadn't cussed at all. I didn't say hell. I didn't even say hell on stage.
Now, did you not curse when you were doing stand up because you were taught not to bring profanity in, or you just, that wasn't even in your psyche?
No, I came from intercollegiate speech and debate competition. After Jehovah's Witnesses, I got into a junior college. I got on the speech and debate team. And on the speech collegiate circuit, there's no cussing. And I end up winning over a few years the number one speech to entertain comedy speech against Harvard, Duke, everybody. I won number one in the nation at that funny event with no cussing. So I realized that was going to be my lane. I don't cuss because I never had. And I'd done a ton of funny speeches. So when I hit the club, I said, I'm going to do it clean. So it just happened that way. And then I hit the truth of authentic solo shows, and I told the truth in those, which involved the reality of cursing.
You have a quote that you love, so I'm going to repeat the quote and then I want your feedback. The man who loves walking will go further than the man who loves the destination.
Yes, we often look at the end goal. We're going to be famous, we're going to make a lot of money, but you got to love the process. You got to fall in love with rehearsal. You got to be excited about it. I'm going to put on my sweats and I'm going to do my stretches and I'm going to rehearse today. I've got to call 20 theaters today or write a crafted email. You got to love that part too, or you're in the wrong business. That's the walking. The destination is the movie's done, the check clears, all that stuff. But the walking is all the work before you get there. So you better be loving you some walking. Because if it's just to get to the destination, you won't last. It's impossible. You have to be genuinely passionate about this business to last. And you got to diversify. That's one of the things I try to push out too. It's like, if you only act, then you're waiting for somebody to give you a role. If you only write, you're waiting to find actors. You better start doing multiple things that are in the sphere. Some people are like, my passion is to be an actor. My passion is to be a writer. Well, get around it. Don't work over at DWP, the Department of Water and Power, as a secretary. Work as a secretary, as an assistant to an executive producer. At least be in your landscape of passion. That's how people end up nowhere near what they're dreaming. Then they get those golden handcuffs of a killer gig that's making them six figures. That's got nothing to do with entertainment. Now they got a family. Now they got to keep. Now they got a pool. They got some cars. Now they got to keep making that money. and they can't ever make it now from their passion because they're golden handcuffed into this other thing. Stay in the zone of the passion you want to work in and get to the six figures or the good living within that.
Business wise, what advice would you give a young artist, be it a actor or comic, regarding the business side of show?
Try to, first of all, do as much of it as you can yourself at the start. And sometimes you have to do it yourself, meaning don't wait and say, as soon as I get an agent, my career is going to take off. As soon as I get a manager, as soon as I get this other person to market me, you start marketing yourself first, and then be wise enough that if the right agent or manager produces, presents themselves to you and say, you're doing really well, don't be afraid to give that person the 10% of this gig you got on your own. That gets you in the door to 100 other opportunities. Some people are like, well, I got that myself. I don't need to be working any business dynamic with someone else. As far as you can take it on your own, do. If you get a massive enough deal, only have an attorney because that's just 5% rather than 10% from an agent and 15% from a manager. That's 25%. And if there's an attorney involved in too, then that's 30% plus taxes. Now you got $4 hoping for a brighter day. Definitely use representation when you can. Be wise enough to know when it's time to use them. And if you can get in a situation where you got a great dope deal and agent says they'll represent you, they might turn that into more jobs. So just being wise about when to expand, and don't wait. Do not wait for an agent or a manager to start getting you work.
Any last words of wisdom that you want to leave the audience with?
I'll say this. There's a ton of AI happening right now, a ton of artificial intelligence. Some of it is very good. It shortcuts a lot of processes for different things, but there's too much of it. There's too much artificial intelligence. And so you have to get into a different kind of AI, which I call authentic interaction. And that's what storytelling is, and that is what one person shows are. And the more and more and more and more technology that is created, the more and more value just seeing another human stand in front of you without it is valuable. I'm understanding that. I'm following the mode of that with an event I created in Marin called Redwood Nights Storytelling Under the Stars. When a child is born, the first thing they ask for is safety and protection. The very next thing they request is to tell me a story. That's how deeply connected it is to who we are and our human connection. And you've got to put yourself not in just someone else's shoes, but put yourself inside their story. So get into the business of live storytelling. Particularly, the highest return can be from a one person show because the lasers and the AI are going to go and shoot and ricochet off Mars and the whole nine. But the more that happens, the more people are going to hunger for this kind of AI, authentic interaction.
I almost forgot. There's something I want to share with you in honor of our pimp dads. I am wearing my mentor, uh, Max Julien, the
Is that
Mac.
from the Mac?
This is
From the Mac. Oh,
from the Mac. Um,
oh,
yes,
where'd you get that?
I actually got it online a few years ago after Max died. He was my first mentor out here. He took care of me, um, and kind of guided me. I would say the first 2 years of me being in Los Angeles. He was my big brother. He was looking out for me, and
That is so beautiful.
I got to share everything acting with him. Like I would tell him about my acting class. I would tell him about my audition. He would pick me up on Saturdays, and we would go to the beach and talk and go eat at IHOP. And but he was the original Mac, and
The original Mac, shot in Oakland,
that's right,
exactly.
the Mac. And so I just wanted to leave you with that gift of
And
the
and you
Mac.
gotta let me know. Send me the link I must have one
Okay,
of
it was
those.
on Etsy. It was on Etsy. I'll see if I can find it. It was like maybe 3 years ago, 2 years ago. He passed away recently, and
Right.
I was like, I was devastated because
Yeah, you knew him. Yeah.
you people who are good, you want them to be with you forever,
Yeah.
and he was definitely that influence to me. So thank you, Don. This has been most wonderful. I think it will really bless people. You are outstanding. Your journey as an artist, your journey as a man, as a human being has been amazing. I'm glad I know you. I'm glad you're my brother from another mother. I love
Ooh,
you.
ooh.
I love you,
I love
Don
you
Reed.
too.
I
Thank you
love
so much.
you.
I love you so much too.
So
Um,
thank you.
I love what you're doing. It's inspired. This process has inspired me to make sure I keep the move on. My podcast is happening out in Marin. So thank you so much. You
Yes.
gave me a lot today as
Oh,
well.
thank you, because you give me a lot. Every time we come into the theater, I go, Don is here. Don is here. So Don Reed is amazing. I love everything that he said. I can't believe he did 9 one-person shows. That is a lot. It's fantastic. I want to know what you think in the comments. Let me know if it triggered something in you to say, hey, I could do my own 1-person show. Or if you want to get more information on the 1-person show, put it in the comments. And while you're there, buy me a latte. And don't go anywhere because I got another great video on 1-person shows just for you coming up right now.